You lose your job on a Thursday afternoon. Not a surprise, maybe. Maybe it was coming. Maybe you chose it. Either way, the income stops. And for the first 72 hours, almost nothing changes. You still wake up at the same time. You still drink coffee from the same cup. The electricity works. The internet works. Your phone buzzes with messages. The fridge still has food. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself you have savings. You tell yourself you'll figure it out. And you believe it. Because right now, in this exact moment, everything around you still functions exactly as it did when you were earning. But something has shifted beneath the surface. Not visibly. Not yet. What you're experiencing is the gap between when the income stopped and when the system realizes it. Modern life is designed around the assumption that money flows in continuously, not abundantly, not even comfortably, but continuously. And when that flow stops, the structure doesn't collapse. It reveals itself, layer by layer, in a specific order. The first thing that breaks is not financial. It's perceptual. It's the illusion that you were in control. For weeks, maybe months, you operated under the belief that you had built something stable. You paid your bills. You managed your expenses. You had routines, subscriptions, plans. It felt like a system you were running. But the moment the income stops, you realize the system was running you. You were not managing it. You were feeding it. And now, without new fuel, it begins to show you what it actually is. In the beginning, you still feel fine. You have savings, maybe a few months' worth, maybe more. You do the math. You divide your balance by your monthly expenses, and you get a number. 6 months, 4 months, maybe 8. And that number feels like time, like buffer, like safety. So you don't panic. You start looking for the next thing. You update your resume. You reach out. You browse opportunities. You take calls. You tell people you're in transition. And for a while, this works psychologically. You're still active, still engaged, still part of the world that earns. But then the first month closes, and the money goes out. Rent, utilities, subscriptions, loan installments, credit card minimums, groceries, transport, insurance, phone bill, internet. All the things that were invisible when income was coming in are now extremely visible because they're no longer being replaced. The balance in your account is lower than it was 30 days ago, and there's nothing coming in to raise it back up. This is when the second layer breaks. The feeling that expenses are manageable. They were never manageable. They were simply being matched. And matching is not the same as controlling. You start paying attention now. You open your bank app more often. You check balances. You scroll through transactions. You start to see patterns you didn't notice before. Subscriptions you forgot about. Charges that repeat. Small things that add up. You cancel a few. You tell yourself you're optimizing. But you're not optimizing. You're reacting. And the reaction is late because the expenses were always there. You just never had to look at them this closely. The system didn't require you to. It only required that you kept earning. Now the third layer starts to press. The fixed obligations, the ones that do not care about your situation. The ME on the car, the ME on the house, the rent that comes due whether you have income or not, the school fees, the insurance premium. These were always non-negotiable, but when you were earning, they felt automatic. Now they feel heavy because they don't adjust. They don't pause. They don't sympathize. They simply exist, and they expect to be fed. And if they're not, they trigger consequences. Late fees, penalties, calls, notices, damage to credit, loss of access. You realize now that your financial life was not a budget. It was a set of dependencies that only remained invisible as long as they were continuously satisfied. The moment you stop satisfying them, they become visible, and they begin to apply pressure, not all at once, but steadily, and the pressure builds. This is where the fourth layer begins to crack. The psychological one, You start to feel it in your body. A tightness in your chest when you check your phone. A hesitation before opening your banking app. You start avoiding certain conversations. You decline invitations. You stop talking about plans. You become quieter, not because you want to, but because the mental space required to manage this pressure is consuming resources you used to spend on everything else. Your focus narrows. Your decisions become shorter term. You start thinking in weeks, then days. You make choices you wouldn't have made 2 months ago. You take calls you would have ignored. You consider offers you would have rejected, not because they're good, because the margin for waiting has shrunk. Fear does not arrive as a sudden event. It accumulates, and it changes the way you process risk. When you had income, you could afford to be patient. You could afford to be selective. You could afford to say no. Now, every day without replacement income is a day closer to a threshold you can't see clearly, but can feel approaching. And that feeling begins to distort judgment. You start negotiating with yourself. You lower your standards. You rationalize. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself you'll fix it later. But later keeps getting closer. The fifth layer is the one that's hardest to accept. It's the realization that your lifestyle, your routines, your sense of normalcy, none of it was sustainable on its own. It was only sustainable as long as the income continued. And without that income, it has no foundation. You were not living within your means. You were living within your income, and those are not the same thing. Means suggests something durable. Income is a flow, and flow can stop. This is not a design flaw in your personal choices. It's a design feature of the economic structure most people operate within. The modern financial system assumes continuous earning. It builds around it. Credit is extended based on it. Housing costs are set relative to it. Lifestyle norms are shaped by it. Even savings, when they exist, are typically calculated as multiples of monthly expenses, which themselves assume that income will resume. The system is not built for, it's built for flow, and when the flow stops, the design begins to show its edges. There's a historical parallel worth noting. Not dramatic, just structural. In agrarian economies, wealth was often tied to land and harvest cycles. There were seasons of plenty and seasons of waiting. People built storage. They preserved. They expected gaps. The economy had rhythm, and the rhythm included pause. In industrial economies, the shift moved toward wages. Regular, predictable, weekly or monthly. And the entire structure of life began to align with that regularity. Housing became rent. Food became purchase. Security became salary. And over time, the assumption of continuous income became so embedded that the absence of it started to feel like failure, rather than variability. We are now in an economy that is even more fluid. Income can appear and disappear faster than ever. Jobs are less permanent. Contracts replace employment. Gigs replace careers. But the financial obligations, the fixed costs, the expectations, those have not become more flexible. They've become more rigid. The gap between the volatility of income and the rigidity of expenses is where the fragility lives. Most people, when income stops, make 3 predictable mistakes. The first is trying to preserve the lifestyle for as long as possible. This feels rational. It feels like maintaining dignity. But what it actually does is burn through the buffer without reducing the pressure. The expenses stay the same. The savings drain, and by the time the adjustment happens, there's less room to maneuver. The second mistake is making short-term decisions out of panic. Taking the wrong job, selling assets at the wrong time, borrowing in ways that create future pressure. These decisions feel urgent in the moment, but they often trade short-term relief for long-term cost. The third mistake is overestimating how long the savings will last. Because savings are calculated when you're calm. But expenses don't stay theoretical, they accelerate under stress. Medical costs, unexpected repairs, mistakes, fees. The budget you estimated rarely matches the budget you live, but there are patterns that create more room. They're not solutions, they're shifts. The first is creating space as quickly as possible, not by cutting luxuries, by reducing fixed obligations, moving to a lower rent, pausing or restructuring loans where possible, canceling anything that auto-renews. The goal is not to spend less. The goal is to reduce the baseline pressure so that time becomes available again. Time to think, time to choose, time to move carefully instead of reactively. The second shift is understanding the difference between liquidity and net worth. You might own things, property, investments, assets, but if you can't convert them to cash quickly without loss, they don't help you when the income stops. Liquidity is what matters in the gap, not wealth, not potential. Liquidity. And most people discover too late that their net worth was not actually accessible in the form they needed. The third shift is building optionality instead of dependency. Dependency means your life only functions one way, one income source, one skill, one market, one employer. Optionality means you have multiple paths, multiple skills that generate value, multiple small income streams instead of one large one, a structure that doesn't collapse if one part stops. This isn't about entrepreneurship. It's about architecture, the shape of how your financial life is built. It's worth acknowledging that not everyone experiences this the same way. Someone with no debt, low fixed costs, and diversified income barely notices a gap. Someone with family support or accumulated assets has a completely different buffer. The breakdown sequence is not universal. It's conditional. It depends on how much of your life was designed around the assumption that the income would never stop. And for many people, the answer is most of it. When income stops, nothing new breaks. That's the part that's hardest to accept. The fragility was always there. The dependencies were always there. The pressure was always there. It was just being masked by the continuous inflow of money. And the moment that inflow stops, the mask comes off. What you see is not a collapse. It's a revelation. The system shows you what it always was, and you see, clearly, which parts were strong and which parts were only standing because they were being held up.